Have you guys ever seen the South Park movie? Or specifically, South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut? Well, I just rewatched it recently, and I thought I'd talk about it in this video. But before we do, how about we talk about South Park the series, just real quick. All of you have probably already seen South Park, or at least heard of it. It's one of the most influential animated series of all time. It might even be the most influential American cartoon. Well, at least top 5. The crazy thing is that the creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, made the first example of South Park as a paper cutout animated short film called The Spirit of Christmas. This was around the early 90s, about 1992, and it was just made as a parody of the traditional stop-motion Christmas special. And this short film was recorded on VHS and passed around everywhere. A lot of people at Hollywood saw it, and a lot of people loved it. Somehow it ended up at the hands of the people of Comedy Central, and the rest is history. A show getting picked up this way is practically unheard of, even by today's standards. This really was a shot-in-the-dark type of story. Of course, without it, we wouldn't have the series we know and love today. South Park has kind of been one of the flag bearers for not only subversive and out-there comedy, but also a strong voice for anti-censorship. In the West, there's always been an issue of censoring an author's point because we simply find it to be too honest or too much to handle. Now, I will admit there are times where censorship can be a good thing, but I think about 80% of the time it's just people pearl clutching or trying to find something to blame. And if anything, the art's just showing you a mirror, though sometimes warped or exaggerated, to look through the world with. Of course, with this, there's always the one question that those people always ask: how will it affect the children? And that's something I think this movie answers pretty expertly. But before we move on to how this movie answers this question, allow me to fill in a bit more of the details. Firstly, by talking about my own relationship with South Park. I wasn't born when South Park was created, but I was growing up during the peak of South Park, that time being the early 2000s. Of course, this was a post-South Park movie world. As a kid, South Park was one of the few shows I wasn't allowed to watch, and I do think my mom was right to limit my exposure to it as much as possible as a kid. It's not that she didn't like South Park, no, she really did, but my mom, being a responsible parent, also understood that children lack a key term called media literacy. Though, to be honest, a lot of adults seem to as well. Anyways, there wasn't a giant list of things I couldn't watch as a kid, but if it was more adult, rated R, or rated M, my mom would actively try to learn about the thing in question to see if it was good for a kid like me to interact with. Mind you, Family Guy was something I couldn't watch either, though when I'd ask her why I couldn't watch Family Guy, her reasoning was, it'll make you stupid. Which, I mean, she isn't 100% wrong with how the later Family Guy seasons are written. As a kid, PG-13 was the hard limit for the most part, which means I could still watch stuff like The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, but a lot of stuff like South Park, Adult Swim, and GTA was off the table. Of course, as kids do, I would eventually stumble across a series kind of on accident one day. It was during one of the few times in my life where we actually could afford cable, and thus I stumbled across South Park on Comedy Central and saw the episode Good Times with Weapons. I saw about 10 minutes of the episode and I thought it was hilarious, but then I saw Butters get his eye. Yeah, safe to say that scared the crap out of me as a kid, and I quickly changed it back to Cartoon Network, which was my favorite channel as a kid. And after that point, I sort of avoided the series because I wasn't allowed to watch it. Well, that and, we were poor. So cable was a luxury, but not one afforded to us. Plus, if I ever did get cable, I basically was glued to Cartoon Network with the occasional Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, or The Hub if they had anything I liked at the time. I would say my first true exposure to South Park was playing through the Stick of Truth with my dad. My dad was always a bit of a South Park fan, though it probably helped that it started airing when he was about in high school. But one day, as we were looking for games to buy, he came across the game and suggested we play it together. Of course, that's when I told him that I thought South Park wasn't something I was allowed to interact with, which my parents then promptly said, "You're 13." Which was more or less the green light of saying, you're old enough to get into South Park, you're mature enough to understand it. It was perfect for me at that age, and truthfully, I still find a lot of it pretty funny. That was my first true leap into the South Park series, which years later was followed by my brother and I watching the whole series on HBO Max during the pandemic. I mean, it's not like we didn't have much else to do at the time, and ever since then, I've had a lot of love for the series. I am interested though in how most of you guys got into South Park. I actually love reading comments on my videos about people's experiences on the stuff I cover, and believe me, I do actually try to read them all. Seriously, let me know down below, it genuinely interests me. Anyways, allow me to move on and talk about how they made the movie, and the show to some extent. As always, we come to the research part of the video, the part where I tell you the backstory and parts of the making of the things I review. Of course, I do this to sort of set the stage, but to also create an understanding for the piece in question. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I don't feel fully right critiquing something if I don't know at least a little bit about how it's made. Getting to the subject at hand though, there's quite a bit of info on this movie, though that mostly comes in the form of interviews with the creators and a special Comedy Central rant on the movie. So if I miss something or you know something that I don't, I'm always glad to hear it. Firstly, I think it may be common knowledge by now that Paramount made Parker and Stone go to a writer's class. This was mostly because Paramount was worried that the movie they'd make would just be utter chaos, which isn't 100% wrong, but it's more so a constructed chaos. It might have also been because the duo's movies before this were pretty poorly received. I haven't really seen Basketball or Orgasmo, but I haven't really heard anything positive about those movies. Maybe that could be a future video idea, I don't know. The crazy part about all this is that Parker and Stone seemed pretty appreciative of this class when speaking about it afterwards. They say it taught them a ton about film structure and how to hook an audience. Honestly, I'd love to take that class myself. They say the experience of taking that class and making the South Park movie was really what shifted their perspective. And I think most people could tell. I don't really know what the general opinion is, but I think peak South Park was definitely season 4 to about season 10. It's kinda where they got a lot of the rougher edges off of South Park's style and writing and really made it debatably the best adult animated comedy of the series. Which is funny because those seasons happened immediately after the movie. Supposedly, the making of this movie wasn't a super simple or clean process, but to be fair, making a movie is never easy. But Parker and Stone said that they were making tons of changes in the movie all the time, including adding in some changes the week before they shipped it to theaters. That kind of stuff is practically unheard of even for today. It shows the dedication and care they showed for the movie, but I do hope nobody had to crunch too hard for when shoving in those final scenes had to be done. Though, to be fair, I've heard that the show itself has had many episodes that were kind of changed last minute. You know, to talk about their process on making the show for a moment, it's actually pretty crazy. There's a really good documentary on YouTube called 6 Days to Air, and in it they go over the process of how they make South Park episodes, and how they literally make episodes in 6 days, which is a crazy feat. Like, to compare, a simple 10-minute episode of animation for something like SpongeBob or Gumball can take months, if not years, depending on what's asked. Of course, nowadays, it seems there's longer breaks between seasons of South Park, which is a good thing. But surprisingly, it seemed like South Park offices and workspace was pretty relaxed and kind overall. The footage they showed of the writer's room seemed very calm and refreshing. I've never been in a writer's room myself, but I could imagine that some writer's rooms can be pretty tense, especially ones that are writing comedies. But with all that research out of the way, let's talk about the movie at hand. Alright, before we get to the review, can I rant for a second? This is the third video in a row where I've had to play detective and figure out where something is on streaming. Can we all admit by now that streaming services have officially reached a ridiculous amount of oversaturation? And not only that, but where you'd expect to find something and it isn't there is genuinely stupid. The SpongeBob movie wasn't on Paramount Plus, it's on Max. Gumball isn't on Max, it's on Hulu. And South Park wasn't on Paramount or Hulu or Max, but Pluto? This is getting genuinely stupid. And you want to know why it's gotten like this? Because we've all let these scummy corpos delete the things they own off the streaming services they own because of either letting them make stupid licensing deals with other companies or simply because they can delete them for a tax write-off. I'm genuinely getting pissed off at this point that we're allowing this stuff to happen, and the fact that it's not illegal. It's just a super anti-consumer process. Like, at this point, everyone, can we just admit it? Cable's better now. And that's a bad thing. Streaming services were made to get rid of the annoyances of cable, and if anything, it's made it 1,000 times worse. Sorry, I don't want to be a super ranty or negative guy, but it's gotten genuinely ridiculous how much research you have to put in to even watch one movie nowadays. And this is why I always tell people to get things physically if you can, because once you have it physically, the only way you can delete it is if it literally gets destroyed. With that being said, rant over, let's start the actual review. I want to talk first about the structure of this movie and how it's pretty much perfect. I'd say almost everything has setup as well as a payoff in the movie. In fact, they set up everyone's motivation in the opening song pretty much perfectly. Though it is typical for musicals to have an opening I Want song to establish a main character's motivation. I haven't seen many that set up most of the cast personalities and goals though. It's pretty good work from the songwriters, I gotta admit. I should also mention that there's a ton of later plot points that are set up here. I mean, Kenny's mom literally says to him that he'll die and go to hell if he doesn't go to church. It's played off as a simple gag, but then it literally happens later in the first act of the movie. I also like how the whole song feels like it's giving nothing but backhanded compliments to the town of South Park. It's always stuff like, "The grass is green beneath the 3 feet of snow," or "This quiet redneck nowhere town." It's pretty funny, and it's pretty on point. It also pushes that idea into the back of the viewer's mind that this may be the kind of town that's not so kind to new ideas. The jokes of this movie are also perfectly South Park. Vulgar as hell, but most of the time, with a clever punchline to go along with it. I'd say most of the jokes land with me, excluding maybe the joke where Stan is just constantly vomiting. Like, geez, he vomits like 10 times throughout the whole movie, and I don't even want to laugh, I just want to take him to a gastrologist. I just think the joke doesn't land because they do it so many times during the movie that it doesn't have a proper shock or payoff to get me to laugh like the other jokes. Don't get me wrong though, the other jokes land really well. Like this gag right here.
I farted once on the set of Blue Lagoon.
Come on, that joke is just so damn funny. I love how it sits on the awkward moment before capping off with a slap. Plus, I think there's been so many times where there's that one person who just wants to force their way into a situation by making a joke, but usually backfires because, well, you simply weren't part of the conversation to begin with. Also, the setup for the double "you killed Kenny" was pretty smart on their behalf, I will give them that. Did you guys also ever notice that it's George Clooney playing the Doctor in that role? Which is a pretty funny cameo considering he was famous for playing on the show ER at the time. Another funny tidbit is that the Doctor's name tag reads Dr. Doctor. Maybe that's just a goofy little sight gag, or maybe it's a reference to the song? I don't know, but I thought it was pretty clever. Though this is the only vomit joke that I think is funny because of Kyle and Cartman's reaction. Their friend is literally getting ripped apart in a surgery right in front of him, and yet they get mad at Stan vomiting on the floor. I mean, come on, that joke writes itself. I also want to highlight this one gag right here before moving on.
Are there any questions, men? Yes, soldier.
Have you ever heard of the Emancipation Proclamation?
I don't listen to hip-hop.
I mean, that might be one of the best pieces of dialogue humor I've ever seen. Also, the Bill Gates joke should not hold up this well. I guess Microsoft is always giving us operating systems full of bloatware and useless crap. Anyways, jumping back over to something I briefly talked about at the start, the songs are all great and catchy, especially Blame Canada, which is the highlight of the film. They even performed it live at the Oscars. I'm not saying the Oscars always recognize great art. I mean, why the fuck did Phil Collins get the reward for Best Original Song that year? I mean, I like Phil Collins' music, but You'll Be in My Heart is not even the best song on Tarzan. Are you kidding me? Now, if it was Blame Canada going up against Stranger Like Me, yeah, I think that'd be at least fair. Also, the song It's Easy MK is just super catchy and probably the second best song of the movie. I love how they're really doubling down on the sentiment that fuck is the worst possible word you can say. And let's just say in a world that's post Xbox 360 lobbies, I can confirm that fuck is nowhere near the worst word you can say in the English language. Though I think that's intentional on the movie's point about pointing out how some people overreact towards certain words and yet probably wouldn't bat an eye towards some other genuinely harmful phrases you can say. And I think here is where I get to the main point of the movie, and how it's not only a genius satire, but also a phenomenal examination of censorship as a whole. It puts a lens onto these groups that lean so heavily on wanting to censor other people's art and experiences to, quote-unquote, protect the children. But as we see throughout the movie, this clearly slips into a hate group forming, and eventually even a whole war was started because of ignorance, self-righteousness, and, let's be honest, maybe just a little bit of racism towards Canadians. There's so many people out there who constantly fight for quote-unquote standards and the children. But who are you really protecting? Your kids or the idea of what type of individual or art should exist? They lay it on pretty thick in Blame Canada. Their kids went to go see an R-rated movie because they didn't take responsibility and look into what their kids were going to see. That was their duty, their job, and as parents they made a mistake. But instead of taking responsibility or having a conversation with their kids about how they should be acting, they instead attack the creators of the movie itself. Why? Because it's easier. Because they want to shelter their kids instead of raising them to grow into mature and understanding adults. And let's be honest, the creators are right. Sure, a parent can only do so much to protect their kids from the more mature and dark parts of life, but if your child ever encounters that, then you as a parent need to talk to them about it. I mean, that's what my parents did to me. I can remember a handful of times when I stumbled across something and my mom explained it to me. Sure, she explained it in a way that a kid could understand, but Understanding and learning is what allowed me to fully comprehend things and to act better in the future. Because it was never about deleting people and art from the world, but instead it's about learning to grow and understand things. And that lack of wanting to grow or learn, well, that's just going to ruin your chances of being a fully developed person. Or a good person, if I'm being real with you. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into a movie that's full of fart jokes and Saddam Hussein and vulgarities, but I do think this movie's message lands well today. And if anything, it's only gotten more accurate. And that's why South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is a genius satire. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the South Park movie. Do you agree? Do you not? Well, I'd be glad to hear it. Let me know if I missed anything you know or want to talk about. And while you're at it, what other movies or shows would you want me to review? I guess I've grown a small audience by now, so I'd like to gauge what some of you would want to see. But that being said, there should probably be some videos on the side here if you want to watch more, and maybe consider subscribing if you liked what you watched. With all that being said, I'll see you next time.